Good morning. I want to talk about image of God this morning as we find it in the biblical passage. But before I do, I want to tell you a story, if I may. Several years ago, I was acquainted with a then Orthodox priest. It was a committee that we were on. He's now a bishop in the Orthodox Church. But he had been a missionary in Alaska. And he told the story, and I don't remember which native group he worked with, but it was one of the tribes in Alaska that lived off of seals. That was their, livelihood and their life. And he told this story about that he heard from his people. It was one of their very traditional stories. These people were totally dependent on seals. And so at one time of the year, probably about the era or the time of the year of birthing, because birth is always a time of great promise and potential. Excitement, yes, but promise and potential, because you never know how the living thing, whether that be an animal, human being, or the land, the crops. You never really know how they're going to turn out, but it's all in the future, and it's always positive. So a time of great potential. So the people would have a ritual experience where they would petition the spirit of the seal to offer up some of their new members, depending upon the size of the tribe. They may need one seal, chances are not. Or every family would need one seal. But they would petition the spirit of the seal to offer up members so that the tribe would survive. Now that's a very profound religious insight. We may think that it's superstitious or pagan. But look deeper and you discover it is an acknowledgement that many of us have lost, you and I, an acknowledgement of total dependence on elements of the natural world. Total dependence. And then they would use every single aspect of the seal with great reverence. They wouldn't throw anything away that could be used. With great reverence, the seal became their food. It became their cooking oil, their fuel for heat. The seal became their clothing. They used elements of the seal in building their homes. The seal not only sustained them, but moved them into the future. And if they did not do this respectfully, then they could not blame the seal if the next year the seal would not offer up what their members could give to the people. Now, offer up really means they're praying for a successful hunt. But they realized in a very deep way, even in the hunt, they were dependent on the seal. I think every one of us should take some time out and ask, how many times do you realize how totally we are dependent on elements of the natural world for everything? For everything. For our food, for our imagination, for that which nourishes our soul. I mean, people, so much spirituality or spiritual books have pictures, magnificent pictures of nature. Why? Because it speaks to our spirit. And many people are moved out of themselves, drawn out of themselves in good music. Whether that music be Bach or drumming. People are just beside themselves. The language we use, it's mystical. And I'm sure we've all had moments of that. Right? So that's the story of the seal. I tell that story because then I ask the question, what kind of people would tell a story like that? You won't hear that story in Milwaukee. You won't hear that story in the Bronx unless you're studying somebody else's literature. Our stories of meaning, our stories of origin and sustenance come out of our concrete experience. Another beautiful creation story that I heard comes from a tribe, and I don't know which one, of the plains, Indians in the plains of the United States. And the story was there were two corn cobs laid down on the ground side by side. Why corn cobs? Because that's what you find on the plains. And you're not going to find, lobster. You're going to find corn cobs. So two corn cobs were laid down next to each other and covered with a blanket. And then the Great Spirit came whooshing down the Great Plains, because that's what the Spirit does. That's what the wind does. And when the blanket was blown away, there was a man and a woman. Now that's a beautiful creation story. And only a child would say, did it really happen like that? Because we know the depth of the story says people of the plains tell about themselves using what they know they come from and they are sustained by. All right? Now we go to Genesis 1. And we discover, and I'm going to look at Genesis 1. Tomorrow we'll talk about Genesis 2. I may get over a little bit into Genesis 2. But let's look at Genesis 1, a story that you may think you know well. Now, I said something yesterday about the change in theology. And I want to say this and be very clear about this. I am not suggesting that the theology we have is not good theology. Worse than that it's wrong. We have gotten new insights. Science has given us new insights. I mean, if you've never read a very simple explanation, if there is such a one, a simple explanation of the Big Bang, you must. Because that's the story of our beginning, yours and mine. That's the story of the reality that sustains us. And there are non-scientific explanations that people like you and I can understand. But that story of the Big Bang is going to force us to reinterpret, because that is a new insight. Does that mean the theology that we have about creation is wrong? I would say that's not the right word to use. Wrong is the wrong word to use. Inadequate. We have new insights. And the new insights force us to look at things with new lenses, with new eyes, with new understanding. We went through that with the Second Vatican Council. We all grew up with the sacrifice of the Mass and altars. That is not an altar. That is a table. An entirely different metaphor. Does it mean altar is bad, wrong? No, we don't use that theology, though it still is in our treasury. And someday we may reach back and pull it out again. But we don't use sacrifice language to speak about the Eucharist. It's a meal, and that's a table. And so it's another metaphor, a different metaphor, talking about the same reality. Right? So theology changes because of new insights. Theology does not change because theologians have got to publish something in order to get promoted. Theology, because if that's all they do, nobody They won't get promotion, and they'll never be able to publish it. Because it's got to be meaningful to the new generation, to the contemporary or the present generation. We went through that with the Second Vatican Council and came out pretty good. We being the church. Came out pretty good. But the church is constantly refining new insights that we got from that particular time in history. We went through that with feminism and came out not badly. All right? But we're constantly renewing how we understand, the not equality of the genders, but the mutuality of the genders. We resisted calling God Father, so we call God Mother, which is no better. God isn't either. But we wanted to balance the bias, and we came out not so badly. And as I read yesterday, the world, are in a new age of change. And Mary Pellegrino, who spoke to us last year, if you'll remember, and I don't know who she was quoting. I don't know if that's her own quote. I think she was quoting someone, but I don't remember when she said, we are not in an age of change or an era of change. We are in a change of era. The whole thing is changing. Which means then, again, as I read yesterday, we must look at our theology with new eyes and not be afraid to realize what we had was good. What we had was good for that time. And we don't throw it out. We learned not to do that with the Second Vatican Council, because sometimes we did with the Second Vatican Council. Just an example of that, because I said it. There are a lot of people of our era who are very concerned that younger generations are going back to old devotion. Well, in a certain sense, if that is the case, and it is, it may be the fault of the Vatican II generation. We got rid of old devotion and did not replace it with new devotion. With what did we replace devotion to Mary? Very little. What we replaced it with was the study of Scripture, which I'm all in favor of. But that's not devotion. All right? So when people want to express themselves in devotion, how do you do it? Chances are you use a pre-Vatican devotion. We still say the rosary. Many people gave up on the rosary. Many people didn't. I don't know how many of you still do the Stations of the Cross, and don't say because you don't, because you can't genuflect. You do it in your head. So I'm just saying there are things of the Second Vatican Council, maybe we threw out some things we shouldn't have thrown out. I don't know. But I know human beings need to express themselves in certain ways, and they'll find new devotions. Or they'll reach back and give new life to old ones. All right, so we're in that particular process now. All of that is simply introduction for understanding, perhaps in a new way, the Genesis 1 creation narrative. Now, you put that, first of all, in its literary context. And if you read all of Genesis 1, which I encourage you to do, you will discover, first of all, remember that the primary traditions of ancient Israel originated as oral stories. Oral stories. And we all know from our own experience, when you repeat an oral story, you don't do it exactly the same way. And sometimes you don't know you're not doing it the same way. But sometimes you deliberately change some details because the people you're talking to have to understand it their way as well as your way. So oral stories have a kind of life to them. However, if you've ever told a bedtime story or any kind of story to children, they will allow you to change some details in the story. They know the story. Talk about oral culture. They know the story. They preserve the story. And you can change some details, but there are some details a child will not let you change. And how that child knows the essence of that story. And the answer is because those details mean something very important to them, and you don't dare change it. There might be another time when you can, but not then. There's a kind of living dimension to stories. So Israel is telling stories. And like all traditional people, like us, when do we tell stories? Usually when we sit down at a meal. And there are certain meals when we tell stories, family meals, like Thanksgiving, family celebrations, like Thanksgiving, or anniversaries. Remember when mother did, and then you go on with the story. And inevitably there will be somebody who will say it didn't happen that way, which means their version of the story is different. Wrong? No, different. I am a second child, okay? There are things, and not too different in age. My sister's 2.5 years older than I am. Sometimes when we get together, I think, were we raised in the same house? I don't remember that. And really what I'm saying, I don't remember it that way. Now, I'm saying something we have all experienced, okay? So what we have here is a story. As you read Genesis 1, nobody tells a story in such a formal structure as we find in Genesis 1. This is a story that has been told over and over again and has assumed a very formal structure. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I just want to say, in order to understand what the structure, the story of the creation of human beings, you've got to understand it within that structure. So what we got is evening, morning, and I'm sure you know that the day begins with when there are 3 stars in the horizon. That's when the Jewish day begins. If you have any Jewish friends, they have to know exactly when cosmology tells us that there are now should be 3 stars on the horizon so you can begin the celebration of Passover. And it begins in the evening. Okay? So you've got evening, morning the first day, evening, morning the second day, evening, morning the third day. Structure. And what happens? Things are created the first 3 days. And the fourth and fifth and sixth days, what was created is decorated. So you've got the creation of the universe, and then 3 days in the creation story. And people go into great length to say these are really eras in the development of the natural world. No, it's a creative story. It's a story. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. First of all, who knows how any of this happened? Who was there? So it's a story that people are telling from their own experience of the universe, which is relatively rich but narrow. So expect a very rich story, but narrow, in a certain kind of understanding. And when we have the creation of living things, you've got, first of all, interesting, the water brings forth living things. The earth brings forth living things. These people knew nature. We talk about them as being primitive. Primitive. They are not. We stand on the shoulders of giants when we read traditional stories, whether it be biblical or Native American or African. So we have then the story of living things. And after these different categories of living things, they knew categories. Where do you suppose categories come from? All right? When they spoke about the creation of categories, and God said, increase and multiply and fill your habitat. Increase and multiply and fill the waters, increase and multiply and fill the air. Okay? And it's a very definite kind of literary structure, which means ultimately somebody did editing and it was published, but hundreds of years later. When we get then to the creation of human beings, what we have is, well, first of all, I skipped something. When God said, let the waters do this, bring forth. And God said, let the earth bring forth. And then God said, let us. So now we got the creation of human beings. It is the same structure, but it's significantly different. Human beings do not come from earth, even though human beings are earth creatures. And again, don't get scientific or historical. Think of why the storyteller is saying this. You should hear right away, that's different. It's a little different. Where do human beings come from? Let us. Now we think of Trinity immediately. No, it's probably, well, I don't want to get historical right now. I will in a moment, but it's not Trinity. All right. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness. There are two words in there that are very important to us, and they're in a kind of parallel construction. And one word is image. Image is a concrete word. Image is what Israel was forbidden to make. They were not to make molten images. Why not? Everybody else did. And the reason is because it is so easy to misunderstand that image. It is something concrete, and we can hang on it the wrong way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But image is a concrete word. Likeness is not concrete. Likeness means it's like. It doesn't say it is, it means it's like. Now I realize this is a translation, and this is what the English words mean. But the Hebrew means something like that. Hebrew is really a gutsy language. It is a very concrete language. Most traditional languages are. They are not philosophical. They're not theoretical. Most traditional languages are not. They're very concrete because that's where the people live, in the reality of life. So what we have is an image and a likeness. Is it an image or is it a likeness? And the answer is yes. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. In other words, everything that's alive. So image and likeness and have dominion. Now the question is, what does dominion mean? So, and here's just as in the pattern, just when God says, and let the waters bring forth, or let the earth bring forth, the second line in that pattern is, and so it happened. And the third line of the pattern is, and God blessed it and said, increase and multiply and fill your habitat. So that's the pattern. So this is verse 27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. There's a parallelism in there, and I don't want to talk about Hebrew poetry, but it's a very technical, poetic form. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. And then here's the list again of the animals. Over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth. Now what we have in this pattern I said after the creation of the water animals, there was, and God created them and said, increase and multiply and fill your habitat. When we've got the creation of the land animals, there is no blessing. You expect a blessing, there is no blessing. The blessing instead is found after the creation of human beings. Increase, multiply, and fill the earth. That blessing belongs to land animals, of which human beings are one. But the pattern is broken, and anyone who is from an oral culture knows immediately something is different in this story. And the issue is not, let's correct it. The issue is, what point is the storyteller trying to make? And this is the way the story says, this is an unusual creature, simply the way the creation of that creature is told, and people catch on. But people also catch on. There is a relationship here between the other earth creatures, the beasts, and the creeping things, and this creature. But this creature is unusual. All right, now that's the text, that's the story. The question is, what is an image of God? I want to tell you, over the centuries, that metaphor has been interpreted to mean almost anything. You and I grew up learning one interpretation of a metaphor. And that interpretation is soul. That word is not found in the text. The original story is not thinking about a soul. In fact, the original story, which is told and written in Hebrew, does not have a word for soul. That is not to say that the people did not believe that there was a more than material dimension to human beings. Of course they did. They didn't call it soul. That's a Greek word. It's a Greek word. So you don't find that. You should not find that anywhere in the Old Testament in your translation. Though some translators do put the word soul in so that we'd understand what they're talking about. Not because it's in the text. It's for the benefit of people who may not be able to read it from the original language. Okay? So, soul has also been interpreted as the fact, one of the greatest Lutheran scholars of the 19th century, Karl Barth, said that the very fact that humans walk upright, that's the function, that's what soul means, that we are an animal that walks upright. And they're not pulling these interpretations out of a hat. I mean, depending upon how, the context of your interpretation. The fact that a differentiation of the gender, as we find image of God in the poetic structure, image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Image of God and male and female are in parallel construction. And there are some feminist theologians, not some of the most reputable ones, but some feminist theologians who would suggest that what this story, again, not scientifically, but what the story is trying to point out, that the very fact that there are two genders is what image of God means. So, there are all kinds of interpretations. I want to suggest that we look at what is probably the earliest and first understanding of image of God, and it's not soul. So I would ask the question, what is an image of God? And the answer is, it is an image of God. Just as the Canaanites created images of their God. Now, not a bust. It was not a bust, as we find, the bust of JFK, all right, or the bust of Abraham Lincoln. Not that kind of an image, a symbolic image. Symbolic image. And we use images all the time, you and I do, and by that I mean human beings, use images all the time. Remember, I don't know how many years ago, the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, that and Godspell. I forget which one it is, but the image of the Christ was a guy with an afro. Now, of course, Jesus didn't have, well, he might have. He was a Middle Eastern, but he did not have a blonde afro. That was contemporary to the time of the play. And the Christ figure in that play also wore a Superman S. If you remember that. We all know what that meant. Nobody had to say, now that character represents Christ. Nobody had to tell us that. Because we realized Superman, that's Jesus. Those are symbols, okay? So the symbol takes some characteristic and really makes it the focal point. So the Canaanites, frequently, their image of their god was a calf. Calf is, young animals are always very important because they have promise. Notice, how enlightened I'm becoming. That's fine. But a young animal is always promise and potential, always the future. And it's male, and it's young, and it's virile. And that's how they understood their God. And so they made an image of their God, a symbol of their God. Now, here's the problem with images. It is very easy to cross the line from seeing in that image the God who is behind the image and seeing the image as the God. Now, we may not find that a problem when it comes to something concrete, but we certainly find it a problem when it comes to something which is a doctrinal interpretation. We cling to a theological interpretation, and we find it extraordinarily difficult, sometimes impossible, to let go. And frequently the interpretation is the first one that we learned. And we do that because we were told that this is God's will for us. And it is our commitment to God's will and doing what God wants that we find it extraordinarily difficult to give up our understanding. Because does that mean everything I have thought about God in the past is wrong? Is that what it means? I remember this happened, I would say maybe 25 years ago, at least 25 years ago. I remember thinking, am I glad that I'm in Bible and not in systematic theology? Because I don't think I believe that anymore. I really struggled with that until I realized I just don't believe it the same way. All right? And I would hope you have that experience, not necessarily the first one, but the second one. I don't understand it the same way as I used to. I'm sure you have had that experience. Right? So, again, I go back to I find absolutely no value in saying that theology or spirituality of the past was wrong. I see no value in that personally. It's very important for me to say that and to feel that. However, because it is always inadequate, always, it's the best we can do given the circumstances of our day. That's all we can hope for. It's the best we can do because we're dealing with the mystery of God. How can we possibly think we understand what we're talking about? It's all mystery. Karl Rahner said, if you are sure about something about God, be sure that you're wrong. It's not God. It's mystery. Now that's the Western church. The Eastern church does not have the problem in the same way because they have they have a negative kind of theology. In their theology, in some theologians say more about all of this is wonderful, but it's not God. It's more what God is not than what God is, which has to do with difference between the Eastern mind and the Western mind. So image of God then, getting back to image of God, you've got something tangible. We can see this, and it's very easy to think that that's the God, not a representation of God. Now, what kind of people think like that? Certainly not whalers, not people whose lives depends upon seals. So one would ask the question, who in the ancient world thinks about them being an image of a deity? Who thinks like that? And the answer is, I'm going to tell you, you know this answer. You know that there are many societies, as far as I think we can go even to the 14th century. No, not the 14th century, Louis XIV, who believed that the monarchy were divine. That is very common in many societies, certainly in traditional societies, ancient traditional societies. They believed that their king and queen, and it depended upon what kind of mutuality they had. So I want to just speak about their king. They believed that their king was either God in human form or the Son of God. The title Son of God really means literally the son of the deity, and all kings were thought to be that. So that tells us that people here telling the story are people who are not necessarily themselves royalty, but live in a kingdom with a king. And what does the king do? What's the responsibility of the king? The text tells us. Subdue your enemies and have dominion. Barbers don't do that. Secretaries don't do that. Whalers don't do that. Monarchy does that. And we know from history that this gives monarchy tremendous power, but also responsibility. And is that not what the Genesis 1 creation narrative says about the man and the woman? They have tremendous power over the rest of the natural world, but also responsibility. Because they are image of God, they're not gods. And how easy it is to cross that line. Not only the king himself would cross the line, but the people also would cross the line. So while we are told, in a certain sense, we know from Israel that the ancient Israelites were told not to make idols, not to make images. Almost in the same breath, you are an image of God. Don't you dare do what the Canaanites have done. Think that you are the center of the universe, to use contemporary language. Notice we all get back to that. Who do you think you are? And jumping over from this story in Genesis 1 to the sin, don't call it the fall. From what did they fall? It's a story about a tree, and they didn't fall from a tree. Fall is a metaphor. When I ask my students, from what did they fall? Some smart one would say, from grace. I said, grace is a Christian concept. You don't find that in the story. Sin? Yes. What was their sin? Don't be too quick to say disobedience, because fundamentally all sin is some form of disobedience. What did the serpent say to the woman? Let me see, this is in chapter 3. The serpent said to the woman, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. There's a word for that. It's called hubris, the ultimate pride. Hubris. Somehow or other, we all suffer from it. Somehow or other. Ultimate pride. I choose my way as opposed to God's way. Or in society, I'm, the center of the universe, not you. And if you think about all of the inclinations that we all have, we may not have all of them, but we have at least one real good one. Inclination to sinfulness. It's either, pride, I'm better than you are, I'm smarter than you are, I'm prettier than you are, I'm faster than you are. It's either that, because I'm the center of the universe, or it is jealousy, or it is gluttony. I want it all. I mean, it makes us the center of everything. We all have those inclinations. And in a certain sense, we're born like that. Those kind of inclinations. Look at a newborn. A newborn literally is the center of the world of those people. They change their whole house around. They don't sleep anymore. They child-proof the house. Everything centers around that child. Why? Why? And again, we all know that because the child is so needy, which means the neediness of every single one of us really tells us how we need each other. We are needy, totally needy in the beginning and at the end. It's in between those that we think, I don't need you. I don't need anyone. I am self-sufficient. And we all do that in our own ways. Some people do it very ostentatious and explicitly. Other people are passive-aggressive. And they, I don't need you. And you and I constantly say, we need each other. And the each other is not just a social issue. It is really an environmental issue as well. We are needy. So we go back to the sin, wanting to be like God. That is the sin. I don't know if you knew this. I'm long again, but let me just say, in chapter 28 of Ezekiel, there is a second version of this story. Same story, different details. Mortal, say to the prince of Tyre, thus says the Lord God, because your heart is proud and you say, I am a god. Now, there's historical backing to this. Tyre was a very, very prosperous nation. I sit in the seat of the gods. There's that hubris. In the heart of the seas, it was a seaport. Yet you are not a mortal and no god, though you compare your mind with the mind of a god. You are indeed wiser than Daniel. No secret is hidden from you. By your wisdom and your understanding, you have amassed wealth for yourself and have gathered gold and silver into your treasuries. You are very accomplished. By your great wisdom in trade, you have increased your wealth, and your heart has become proud in your wealth. Success can be extraordinarily dangerous. Dangerous because we think, look what I've done. Look what I have become. Therefore, says the Lord God, because you compare your mind with the mind of a god, therefore I will bring strangers against you, the most terrible of nations. They shall draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and defile your splendor. You're going to get it. Further on, it says, you were in Eden, the garden of God. It's the same story. Some of the details are very similar, but other details really fit into a new context. And we all could tell our story of our fall from pride. Sometimes we are cut off at the knees. Seldom, I think, I don't know, maybe this is my experience. Seldom does humility come gradually. Seldom in my life has it come, if I even have any. But it's usually I feel like I've been cut off at the knees. Or they have found out. When they find out what I'm really like, and then I am unmasked, and they'll find out I'm not what they think I am. And the only reason I can say that to you and be that honest with you is not because you know me, it's because I can't believe you are that much different than I am. That's what it means to be a limited human being, afraid of being or acknowledging our limitations. So that's image of God. And once again, notice how a new insight with new ecological insights can enrich that story. Wouldn't it be interesting for everyone to write her own story of the garden? You know, and what would it be? What details would you put in? Because every one of us has at least one version of it. One version of it. When our eyes have been opened and we realize not only we're not what we thought we was, we don't have to be what we thought we wanted to be or what we thought we should be, at least in the minds of other people. Who did these people think they were? Gods? We have an expression in the country. Who died and left you, boss? That's what I'm talking about. Who died and left you, boss? Or who died and left you, God? Or who do you think you are? You're not my mother or my superior. All right? So, and that we don't outgrow that, unfortunately. Unfortunately. Or maybe it's because I haven't yet. Every once in a while, it's almost like a monster just comes out from underneath and wants to open its mouth and swallow me back in the weekdays. And we have moments like that. And those moments when we realize, you fraud, you fool, those are good moments. Good moments. Because we don't have to be divine. First of all, we can't be. But we don't have to be gods. That's not our business. And if it happens and we are told somehow or other we share in that kind of divinization, it is not because of our doing. It is because of God's goodness. So, ponder these things. So on the one hand, we are image of God. Don't let it go to your head.